you.
Okay, everyone, we're recording just for everyone's benefit. This is a recorded meeting. It'll be posted on the town website afterwards. Mary, your meeting.
Vince, can you verify that we have a quorum? Just because person yet?
One moment. I see we have Sarah, Ian, Jen, Fritz. I can also see Matt Fee is present.
Okay. Thank
Graham
you.
And Peter.
Graham and Gary and Peter are also on.
Thank you. Well, welcome everybody. I will call this meeting of the Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee to order. For this meeting, the Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee is convening by video conference via the Zoom app as posted on the town's website, identifying how the public may join. Members of the public wishing to participate in the meeting must use their full name for Zoom access. If full names are not used, people will not be allowed to participate in the discussion. The town reserves the right to remove any member of the public from the meeting who doesn't use a full name or inappropriately. I am Mary Longacre, Chair of the Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee. To get started, I'll confirm that all members and persons anticipated on the agenda are present and can hear me. Members, when I call your name, please respond in the affirmative. In alphabetical order, Gary Beller.
Present.
Sarah Boyce.
Present.
Peter Brace.
Present.
Graham Durovich.
Present.
Matt Fee. Matt, are you there? Ian Golding.
Yes.
Jen Carberg.
Present.
Fritz McClure.
Present.
And Mary Longacre. If Matt does join us, Vince, would you just give me a heads up on that? I see that he's on. Oh, there he is. Thank you, Matt. All right, staff, when I call your name, please respond in the affirmative. Vince Murphy.
Present.
And I'm gonna have to do a little guessing. Do we have Holly Backus?
Present.
Do we have other members of town staff here? Chuck Larson?
Not that I'm aware.
Okay.
Yes. Good job.
I'm sorry, would those of you who are not participants on the agenda, would you mute yourselves? I can't tell where those miscellaneous noises are coming from. Thank you. Anticipated speakers on the agenda, when I call your name, please respond in the affirmative. And we have Trevor, I'm sorry, Trevor, I've forgotten. Trevor Johnson.
Present.
We also have Carly Foster.
Carly actually won't be joining today.
She won't be joining. Okay.
Yes.
Trevor, do you have other members of your team here?
Yes, yeah. So we have Kate Edwards, who is with Arcadis. And then we have Amy Whitesides from Stoss, Chelsea Kilburn from Stoss as well. And then Travis Bunt from One Architecture. If he's not already on the call, he will be joining shortly.
I see him there. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, introduction to our remote meeting. Good morning. This open meeting of the Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee is being conducted remotely, consistent with Governor Baker's executive order of March 12th, 2020, due to the current state of emergency in the Commonwealth due to the outbreak of the COVID-19 virus. In order to mitigate the transmission of the COVID-19 virus, we have been advised and directed by the Commonwealth to suspend public gatherings. And as such, the governor's order suspends the requirement of the open meeting law to have all meetings.
I have to go to Marine
Marshall, please mute yourself. Requirement of the open meeting law to have all meetings in a publicly accessible physical location. Further, all members of public bodies are allowed and encouraged to participate remotely. The order, which you will find posted with the agenda materials for this meeting, allows public bodies to meet entirely remotely so long as reasonable public access is afforded so that the public can follow along with the deliberations of the meeting. Ensuring public access does not ensure public participation unless such participation is required by law. Time permitting, this meeting will feature public comment. Please note that this meeting is being recorded and that all attendees are participating by video conference. Accordingly, please be aware that other folks may be able to see and hear you, and take care not to share the screen on your computer. Anything you broadcast may be captured by the recording. All supporting materials that have been provided members of this body are available on the town's website unless otherwise noted. The public is encouraged to follow along using the posted agenda unless the chair notes otherwise. Before we move to the first item on the agenda, I will cover some ground rules for effective and clear conduct. I will introduce each speaker on the agenda. After they conclude their remarks, the chair will go down the line of members, inviting each by name to provide any comment, questions, or motions. Please hold until your name is called. Further, please remember to mute your phone or computer when you're not speaking, and please remember to speak clearly and in a way that generates accurate minutes. For any response, please wait until the chair yields the floor to you and state your name before speaking. If members wish to engage in a conversation with other members, please do so through the chair, taking care to identify yourself. For items with public comment, after members have spoken, the chair will afford public comment to those members of the public that have joined the meeting via Zoom. Members of the public who wish to speak must state their names and be acknowledged by and speak through the chair. Finally, each vote taken in this meeting will be conducted by roll call vote. I want to remind everyone we have a large crowd today, and I thank you all very much for attending. Please do keep yourselves on mute unless you're called upon or recognized to speak. I will be turning the chair of the meeting over to Trevor Johnson from Arcadis Group to facilitate his agenda, which is included with our agenda. And I think with that, Vince, do we have anything else before we go straight to Trevor?
No, that's about it.
Okay, I'm going to make one note. The Arcadis Group has a full agenda. We normally meet for 2 hours. We are happy to let this meeting run long in order to accommodate as much of the agenda as possible. We will be next meeting on December 8th, Tuesday at 10 a.m. And we will continue comments on this agenda at that meeting. So if you do not have an opportunity to be heard today, please either feel free to submit comments in writing via email to vincevmurphy@nantucket-ma.gov or to attend the meeting on December 8th. We definitely do want to receive all of the input that we can from members of the public. All right, with that, Trevor, I will turn it over to you and thank you.
Madam Chair, I think as a point of order, this is Ian Golding speaking. I think we have to vote on it.
Vote on what specifically?
On you handing the chair over to someone else, to Trevor Johnson. Otherwise, theoretically, you could hand it over to, you know, whoever.
Okay, I'm happy to entertain a motion to hand the chairmanship of the meeting to Trevor Johnson.
So moved.
Thank you, Ian. Do we have a second?
Second.
Second.
Matt, I heard seconded, and roll call vote. Gary Beller.
Yes.
Sarah Boyce.
Aye.
Peter Brace. Peter, can we hear your vote?
Aye.
Graham Durovich.
Aye.
Matt Fee.
Aye.
Ian Golding.
Aye.
Jen Carber.
Aye.
Fritz McClure.
Aye.
And chair votes aye. Thank you, Ian, for the clarification. Trevor, all yours.
Madam Chair.
All right, great. Actually, Vince, were you going to say a couple words before turning it over to me? I'm happy to take over, but I know you had some comments you wanted to make just to sort of frame the conversation today.
Yes, I do, and thank you very much, Trevor. It'll only take 2 minutes. I'd first like to thank the 3940 odd participants that we have on here today, and thank you all for attending, particularly to members of the community and various groups that are attending, as well as CRAC and Arcadis and partners. The Coastal Resilience Plan is to be an all-island and all-county plan. The major themes are to tackle coastal flooding and erosion and the impacts of sea level rise. The major purpose is to increase the longevity of the island. This comes with some major challenges. How do we maintain the historic character and environmental integrity of the island while also developing solutions for flooding? These are somewhat at odds with each other. Added to this, solutions must also be acceptable to the community and be sustainable in the face of sea level rise. These make the challenges of workable solutions all the more difficult. Compromise and ingenuity will be needed by all people of Nantucket to face these challenges. We also need more than one type of solution. We need infrastructure in the downtown area to limit the impacts of flooding, while also maintaining a working waterfront in a historic district that works for our year-round community and visitors alike. Our beaches are, and their high quality, are also the most known and enduring feature. Green and grey infrastructure on our coastlines to reduce erosion impact is another viable solution, but not the only way to go. We also need new policies and new bylaws to deal with where and how we develop property in or close to flooding and eroding areas. These policies can also lay the foundation for how Nantucket can deal with rising seas and other effects of climate change. In developing a coastal resilience plan, think about our resident population and visitors in equal measure. These two interlinked communities need this island to be a resilient place where we can reduce damage to property from flooding, erosion, and coastal hazards. And with that, thank you very much. Welcome to all, and Trevor, it's yours.
All right, thanks, Vince. I'm going to share my screen. Mary, do I have permission to do that? Or Vince, I guess?
I've already given you the ability.
All right, great. Just one moment here. Okay, can someone just let me know? Vince, shaking your head. Good, great. So thank you everybody for having us here today. Thank you to the members of the Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee for allowing us to use your agenda today to present our approach, introduce our team, and have an interactive discussion with you about the work that we are beginning to undertake for Nantucket. We have a couple of objectives today. We're looking to develop a shared understanding of roles and responsibilities, expectations, goals, and the relationship that we will have, our team will have with the Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee over the course of the next 10 months. We are looking to clarify measures of success and what is needed to accomplish those measures. And then finally, we're looking to share or begin to share detailed information on coastal resilience concerns and opportunities. So we have an agenda that we've devised, involves both kind of presentations from our team as well as interactive exercises. So the first part of our agenda will be a brief project overview, kind of our approach to the project. We'll talk about team alignment, so how our team can best align with the Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee as the primary steering committee of our project. The roles and responsibilities, what our team is hoping that the Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee can help, it can provide to our team and help as we move through the process. We'll introduce our stakeholder engagement approach that we've been working to develop with Vince and some other stakeholders. And then we'll have an interactive mapping exercise looking to begin to identify key coastal resilience challenges and opportunities. Before proceeding, I'll just introduce myself. I am Trevor Johnson. I am a resilience planner with Arcadis. I'll be serving as the primary project manager for this project, working closely with our internal team of technical experts at Arcadis, as well as other members of our project team from STOSS, One Architecture, and the Craig Group, some of whom are joining us here today. And actually, I'll just quickly turn it over to each of those members to briefly introduce themselves so you can put a face to the name. Amy, why don't you go first?
Sure, great, thanks Trevor. Hi, I'm Amy Whitesides. I'm the Director of Resiliency at STOSS. We're a landscape architecture firm out of Boston, and I'm really excited to be part of this project.
Thanks. Chelsea, do you want to go next?
Sure, thanks, Trevor. Hi, everyone. My name is Chelsea Kilburn. I'm also here with Amy from STOTS. Really looking forward to working on this project. Thanks for the time.
Travis.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Travis Punt, principal at One Architecture in New York City. And we specialize in climate adaptation planning and urban design, and are supporting the team on this project.
And Lisa.
Thanks, Trevor. Lisa Craig with the Craig Group. I also have Kimberly Rose on the call with us, currently working on Resilient Nantucket and looking forward to continuing on the Coastal Resilience Plan with all of you.
Right, thanks. And finally, Kate, who's my colleague with Arcadis.
Hi, everyone. I'm Kate. I'm a principal engineer with Arcadis and been working with Trevor on many resilience plans in the area, and we're really excited.
Great, thanks. And I should mention, Arcadis is, for those who aren't aware, is a global design and consulting firm, but both Kate and I are based out of the Boston metro area, let's say. I live in Boston and Kate on the North Shore. And just, you know, we were, many of you I think are aware, and good to see some familiar faces as well from our brief time, all too brief time on Nantucket a couple of weeks ago. This is a picture of our valiant leader, Vince here, providing a tour of Pulpus Harbor. And then here we are in Brant Point. I think we saw all manner of weather when we were on the island. This was day 2 of our trip. Day 1 was very pleasant. Day 2, not as much, though we did see firsthand many of the stormwater related resilience and flooding challenges that Nantucket is facing, as well as the sort of broad spectrum of weather as the temperature dropped about 20 degrees and the wind picked up over the course of the day. So as I mentioned before, I'll give a about 10-minute project overview next, and then we'll, after that, have a bit more of an interactive activity with the members of the committee. So the goal of the project is to develop a comprehensive plan to address coastal flooding, sea level rise, and erosion for the entire island. The process will include identifying important community assets, assessing vulnerability to future flooding along the coast, identifying actions to reduce flood and erosion risk, evaluating these options, and then developing an integrated and comprehensive resilience and adaptation action plan. We will be working with you, that is the Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee, as well as the broader Nantucket community to undertake an inclusive engagement process. And we'll be talking more about what that process looks like in detail later in this presentation. So the project is multifaceted and will require us to think about a series of issues and opportunities at various scales. In terms of risk, as I mentioned just before, we'll be looking at coastal flooding and storm surge, the intersection of coastal flooding and storm surge with future sea level rise, and then finally coastal erosion. And we understand that these risks present themselves differently across the island, and we'll be looking at that in a focused way as we proceed. The scales of investigation, as Vince mentioned at the outset, you know, we are looking at an island-wide scale of inquiry, but we're also very aware that Nantucket has a variety of geographies within it. So thinking about both the island-wide context as well as the specific needs of individual areas and communities from downtown to Sconset to Mattocket to the South Shore and otherwise. We'll also be thinking about both kind of the built environment and the natural environment. So thinking at the scale of ecological zones. And then getting down to the level of critical infrastructure, so specific infrastructural assets or systems that are vital to the resilience of the island. So for example, the transportation network. And then finally, communities and interdependencies. So communities, thinking about how people interact and how communities work together to promote resilience. And that is a primary tenet of our stakeholder engagement approach is kind of building that community capacity to become more resilient over time. And then interdependencies relates to the ways in which communities, critical infrastructure, ecological zones, and different geographies all work together and are interdependent on one another to create a resilient overall system for Nantucket. And then in terms of solution development, we are thinking, as Vince mentioned at the outset, across a variety of types of interventions, from more traditional sort of structural risk reduction infrastructure, things like flood walls, seawalls, stormwater management infrastructure, to nature-based solutions, opportunities to integrate green infrastructure into the existing landscape to increase ecological and built environment resilience. And then thinking about policy and regulation as tools that can be employed to reduce risk and foster adaptation over the long term. And then related to the idea of building community capacity, guidance and education. So, working to ensure that community members and stakeholders are fully aware and have the knowledge in hand needed to guide really the implementation of the plan over time. And I know we'll be building on a lot of work that Lisa and her staff has been doing with you all, as well as many of the other planning initiatives that have happened on Nantucket in recent years. So the project is broadly broken into 5 tasks that you can see here. The first task, which is underway and nearing completion, as a matter of fact, is about project kickoff and data gathering. So we have been working to compile all of the existing GIS and other data to provide a project baseline, as well as reviewing and assessing the prior studies that have been undertaken related to resilience on the island. The second task is, which will span the full duration of the project, is community and stakeholder engagement. So we are underway. We're sort of reaching the final phase of our stakeholder engagement planning process, which we'll talk more about later. And then looking, sort of this week and into December and the new year into kind of the first phase of our engagement process. Task 3, which is kicking off very soon, is the hazard assessment and risk and vulnerability assessment. So looking at, what are the hazards that, in detail, what are the hazards that are faced across the island, and how do those hazards translate into risk? That is the, probability of an event happening, and the consequences of damage or disruption to infrastructure and communities across Nantucket. Task 3, as I'll talk about in a moment, will go into the early spring, which will culminate in the mid-project report, and really start to kick off task 4, which is something that our team is always thinking about, but in earnest will begin the process of developing resilience and adaptation scenarios and strategies for communication and feedback and input with the community before finally arriving at task 5, which is delivery of the final reports. I was just chatting a little bit about the schedule, but this is how it lays out over the next year. We did kick off the project in early October. We'd been working on it since mid-September or so. So we're just finishing up the sort of task 1 data collection. Stakeholder engagement will, as I mentioned before, span the entire project. The stars here are significant milestones. So our first kind of major wave of public stakeholder engagement that may include workshops and other types of broad community activities slated for early in the new year. And then we'll have another opportunity at some point in the late spring, early summer. The timing of that will be determined as we go and kind of dependent on how the process unfolds and what happens with the global pandemic that we're all experiencing at this time. And then task 3, risk and vulnerability, again, beginning about now and spanning through the early spring. The star there is meant to indicate the milestone of our mid-project report. And then task 4 spans from late spring through summer. And then finally, the sort of development of our final reports and resilience and adaptation scenarios and action plans from summer to September, when we'll wrap up the project. And this is a more detailed view of our first 90 days of the project. As I mentioned, we did start work on this late September, early October. We had a kickoff with town staff the first week of November. We conducted a site visit the week of November 9th, and then here we are today on the 24th of November with a kickoff with the Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee, and really a formal kind of launch to the broader Nantucket community, as this is a public meeting. We'll also be having a kickoff presentation with the select board to be scheduled. I'll talk with Vince about getting that on the calendar soon. That'll be another opportunity for broad community introduction to the project. And then, just other near-term events or milestones are just, again, this engagement planning, and that we'll be working with Vince to schedule a number of interviews and opportunities for engagement with specific stakeholders and audiences as part of a listening tour, which is our first kind of phase of engagement. And on the topic of engagement, our approach really uses or sees stakeholder engagement as the backbone of the project. It's vital to its success, not just as we go in terms of informing our approaches and recommendations, but also towards creating a plan that is actually implementable and that has sufficient community support and input to feel for the community to see itself in it and to feel comfortable carrying it forward to implementation. After all, this plan will, this planning process is a year long, but implementation of the recommendations will take decades. So we have been, thinking very carefully about how we want to approach this. And the way that we work is by using kind of waves of engagement to inform periods of work. We will have a wave of engagement, for example, a phase 1 listening tour, which is an opportunity to have a variety of different conversations and collect comprehensive feedback from key stakeholders and key members of the community that then informs work that we will be doing around risk assessment, our understanding of a vulnerability, our ability to think about hypotheses for resilient solutions. And then once we have developed those hypotheses, we then would go back out to the community for another wave of engagement to vet those ideas, vet those analyses, and then bring that information back to another round of kind of refinement of our approach. So you can think about it as, if you go back to this slide, the gray in the back is kind of the waves of engagement combined with our work as sort of technical experts behind the scenes, refining or bringing that community input to the table as we develop solutions. So we'll talk more about what, sort of the engagement waves and what they mean later on. But this is just to give you a sense of how we approach the work. And of course, we'd be remiss without acknowledging the amount of work that has already happened. So we are not interested in or looking to reinvent the wheel in any way. We want to build on rather than recreate any work that's already been done to understand risk and to develop solutions. We also understand that many of these reports have key gaps that will need to be filled in order for us to create a robust and comprehensive plan. But just to let you know that we are aware of the work that's been done, and we are integrating each of these studies into our process moving forward. And this, this just shows a sample of previous studies, not all of the studies that are in the Coastal Resilience Library. So key questions that drive our process, and I would be, I'll read these and then I would be very interested to hear from the Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee if there's anything that we are missing or that they would like us to be thinking about as we start here. So as I mentioned before, the project is meant to honor, leverage, and advance, but not supplant, disrupt, or duplicate other resilience efforts on Nantucket. So we want to be integrated with rather than apart from the other previous or ongoing planning efforts. So the questions are, what are the shared challenges and opportunities, and what are the conflicts and tensions that need to be resolved? What information and recommendations from prior studies should we carry forward, and which need to be reassessed to the earlier slide? What are the most urgent needs to reduce risk? What do decision makers and key stakeholders need to be able to move forward immediately, both today on sort of low-hanging fruit or easy, what we call easy wins, quick wins, and also, you know, next October when the plan is complete, you know, what is needed to really move forward with those recommendations. What are the key gaps in knowledge and understanding? What can we help, or where can we help advance and catalyze? Where are the low-hanging fruits? And then finally, how can this project add social, economic, and ecological value and help improve the quality of life in Nantucket, really getting beyond the kind of question of how can we reduce risk, and really turning that on its head to how can resilient solutions actually, you know, not just reduce risk and create climate resilience, but also improve everyday life for Nantucket residents. So I'll pause there for a moment, and if any members of the committee have other questions that they'd like to see us be thinking about as we start, we can talk about that for a moment.
I'm going to suggest that we use the alphabetical order since we have so many people on the screen. We might somebody. Gary, do you have any comments?
Not right now.
Okay, Sarah?
Hi, I think this is a really great initial list of questions for us to kind of consider and see where the gaps are. Since this is the first time I'm seeing it, I don't really have a lot of time to think off the top of my head about additional questions. But I'm happy to consider and then, you know, provide input later if that helps.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
In the future, when we have future meetings, if there's things like this, it would be helpful to get them ahead of time just so that we can have time to consider. But I think that one thing that I had wanted to make sure what you put in here was making sure that there's the kind of social aspect and making sure that we reach all aspects and improve the quality of life, as you're saying, for all aspects of our community. So I appreciate that is called out here specifically.
Peter? Peter, anything that you wanted to add at this time?
Yes, I'll echo what Sarah said. It would be useful for things like this to be in front of us before, say, a week before the meeting, so that we could comment.
Sure. And Mary, maybe then let's not put people on the spot if we don't want to.
I do want to give people an opportunity to weigh in here. I take your point. Let's just continue briefly down the list. Graham, do you have anything you want to comment right now?
Nothing at this moment. Thank you.
Thank you. Matt?
Yeah, real quick. You're asking challenges. I think the challenges is we are very polarized, you know, particularly on SBPF on one project. And I think that is a, you know, the town itself is polarized. You know, we're split, and it's, you know, and I think that's a good example. Downtown, we're not polarized. Everyone says, yes, we have to do whatever we have to do downtown. We have to do whatever we have to do in Sconset. But there are going to be these tweener places. And, you know, SBPF, you know, Baxter Road is one of them that we need some help finding the right thing to do so that we can not impact other people. So I think we need some help. It would be, you know, it long overdue.
Thank you, Matt. Ian, do you have anything to add right now?
I do. Thank you, Madam Chair. And I'll also keep it brief. Building on Matt's comments and going forward for protection of the town, is there going to be, I assume there's going to be discussion of what sand volumes might be needed in hypothetical situations, since the implementation is for decades, and whether or not the town would be better off owning a sand source in the long term. It would be less expensive. And also the issue of whether one would need floodgates at the mouth of the jetties or going from jetties to CO2, and the infrastructure that might be needed going forward in the decades ahead. Thank you.
And thank you. Jen, do you have comments to add?
Yes, I just wanted to add in with the questions, and it kind of fits into the key gaps in knowledge and understanding. But the idea that there might be solutions that, say, haven't been permitted in Massachusetts or seem completely, far out of left field. We know a lot about what we know on Nantucket, but we don't know what we don't know. So the idea that we need help bringing in possible solutions that we haven't even considered yet, and having that as part of the drive, what are the things that we're not even doing here in New England that might be applicable or useful. And I also wanted to add, while I appreciate the bolded section at the top that this plan isn't going to disrupt or duplicate other resilience efforts, also the idea that if there are solutions that might potentially disrupt other efforts that are happening, but they're of extreme value for what we're trying to accomplish, I think we still would want to at least see what those options might be so we can consider it in the larger picture.
Thank you, Jen. Fritz, do you have comments?
Just briefly, from the point of view of somebody who is on the planning board, excuse me, I would just point out, which is probably obvious, but clearly a conflict and tension which is going to arise. And that is the simple fact that we have many valuable pieces of property that sit on or near the coast and in areas, many of them, most of them, probably in areas that are affected by coastal resilience issues. And that on an ongoing basis, we're going to have to figure out ways to resolve the tensions and conflicts between the desires and rights of individual property owners versus perhaps the needs of the community with regard to zoning, planning, building, and so forth.
Thank you, Fritz. And I do have a few comments as well. The saying that has occurred to me over the last year is, what has to change so that things can stay the same? I think it's very important that we keep that intangible aspect of Nantucket, but that doesn't mean that we keep everything exactly the way it is right now. One of the things that's very interesting about Nantucket is that people consider Nantucket a refuge from stress, a refuge from the pace of modern life, a refuge from a natural perspective. And that's a feature that I think we want to work hard to preserve. The other issue is that we have an incredibly diverse community along so many different avenues, financial, demographic, just an incredible variety of people. And I'm very heartened to hear that Arcadis' approach is to try to include typically underrepresented groups. I think that is going to be very key in having the community agree on whatever actions might be recommended. And I think, Trevor, I'll turn it back to you with that. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Mary, and to the rest of the committee members. Those are all really great comments that I think touch on a lot of our thinking. I was hearing, the need for regulatory approaches and thinking about, how land use is controlled, infrastructure. I liked, very interested to hear more, Jen, about your thoughts on how, maybe it's not disrupting, but how the project can be complementary and help guide existing or ongoing efforts in a direction that improves kind of coordination between efforts on the town. So those are great points. And certainly, this is the beginning, the very beginning, I would say, of what will be a long conversation. So these questions are not set in stone, nor are responses or ability to respond. So we will happily share these slides out afterwards and take feedback as we go. With that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Kate, who's going to talk just a little bit about the team alignment. And what we mean by team alignment is ensuring that our project team is fully aligned with the Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee's expectations for us and for the project. So this will be a little bit interactive. Hopefully the questions that were on the agenda were enough to kind of spur your thinking, but we will also look to facilitate a conversation here. So with that, Kate, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks. Okay, so we have developed a project mission statement alongside some of the members of the town project management and our team. And this is intended to be sort of a living statement that we all work through together as this process goes on. But the statement really is meant to ground our shared understanding of what we're collectively trying to achieve in the project and how we'll do it. So the Coastal Resilience Plan draws on the cherished, built, and natural heritage of Nantucket to create a community-supported roadmap to implementation for a series of layered flood control and adaptation approaches that lessen the loss from storm surges and help the community adapt to rising seas and eroding coastlines. In coordination with other ongoing adaptation and sustainability initiatives, the plan addresses the whole island and county while respecting the unique characteristics of each neighborhood. Driven by the inclusive and equitable engagement of all, the plan aspires to create social, environmental, and economic benefits and value to everyone who will share in Nantucket's future. So this is an evolving statement, but it's something that we'd like to kind of start every meeting with to remind everybody and ground everybody in what we're trying to achieve. And we'll certainly be passing the slides out, and anybody who would like to give us additional input on this, we will gladly take it. Next, we kind of want to cover a little bit of understanding how we know that our team and the plan is on track. So we want to talk a little bit about goals and objectives for the plan and for implementation, because we're always driving towards implementation and the critical elements to get us there. So through the kickoff process that we've kind of gone through that Trevor was talking about when he talked about the schedule, so the folks we've already met with, site visits and things like that, we've already heard some feedback, and we're going to get hopefully some feedback from you today. But we've heard that the process should be include extensive stakeholder engagement to reach the entire island, build shared understanding, and really support actionable solutions. Again, the second bullet point here is really talking about clear implementable solutions for reducing risk. So a plan that is really actionable both in the near term and long term. Recommendations for both nature-based or green infrastructure and gray, more traditional infrastructure. Recommendations for policy and regulatory changes, and we've heard a little bit about that today as well. Seeking to link climate change mitigation and adaptation and providing co-beneficial infrastructure. So infrastructure that actually performs more than one duty here. So also honoring the unique built and natural heritage of Nantucket and incorporating the perspectives of the working waterfront and the importance of the transportation network. So these are the things we've already heard, and we want to kind of jump into starting to understand what you all think. Okay, yeah, so thanks, as Kate. Trevor does this, yes, Trevor is going to facilitate this conversation, and I'm going to try and take live notes and capture, and they should pop up here. So we're going to do this.
And I may have to exit this presenter mode for this portion of the presentation. So yeah, and I think the goal here is kind of interactive, conversation. And so this isn't the end or the last opportunity to provide us this input, but we are very interested in understanding the Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee's primary goals and objectives for the project, what legacy you think that the project should leave behind, and measurements of success. So how would you know that this project is a success, or conversely, how would you know that it did not meet your expectations? And I think related to that, you know, what is it that you really don't want to see during this project that you'd like to see us avoid? I think the members of this committee and the community overall know the island best. You know, the prior planning that's happened, what's worked and what hasn't. So I think any comments or input, I'll turn it over to Mary. Maybe you can help kind of facilitate this or organize responses as you'd like. But yeah, so.
I think we're not going to use alphabetical here. Let me see if I can expand my screen. Trevor, did you want to limit this only to committee members, or were you looking for any input?
Well, let's start with committee members, I think. Though I'm, you know, we certainly would welcome any feedback from the public at large as well. I think it just in the interest of managing time on the agenda, we have a couple slides here, and I would like to get through the stakeholder engagement approach. So if we could kind of limit this to 10 to 15 minutes of conversation as an initial conversation here, that would be ideal. And then we can certainly continue to collect feedback as a follow-up to this meeting.
Okay, do we have members of the committee who want to make a comment here? Sarah, I see your hand up.
Hi, yeah, thanks, Mary. So I have a few things. One is that I really appreciate that the plan will have actionable items, and I understand, or I'm imagining that some of the solutions are going to be, you know, that are suggested are going to be innovative. I mean, that's what we're looking for in the sense of all of this is new. And so a few of the things that I was thinking of was, one was have an adaptive capacity so that we try projects, you know, they're monitored and making sure that that then they can potentially be scaled up. So I mean, I don't know the plan, but I'm imagining that there's going to be lots of different solutions for different parts of the island. Different things are going to be tried in different areas. Maybe some of the nature-based solutions might be smaller to start with. And if we can build in the possibility of scaling up at the same time as being adaptive with, I mean, I would support trying new things that maybe if we try on a small scale and with monitoring and, you know, kind of benchmarks of success could potentially be scaled up. So that's kind of one thing that might have already been part of the plan of different actionable items. Yeah. And then while it's my turn still, I just wanted to say, when you were saying what we don't want, because of a previous experience as we were going through the MVP process, one thing I'm concerned about is relying solely on public opinion for certain decisions. I think obviously it's hugely important to have stakeholder engagement and understand the needs and the wishes of the community. But I worry that if we rely solely on public opinion, we're going to have a few loud voices steer the ship. And I think, you know, I'm really interested in the best science kind of dictating a lot of the, or helping us identify particularly vulnerable areas and those knowledge gaps and things. And obviously, the opinions of our community are very important, and but I'm worried that I have been worried in the past that would steer the ship. So that's one of my concerns.
Other committee members with comments right now? Give me a wave.
Madam Chair, Ian Golding.
Yes, Ian.
So as the representative for CONCOM on CRAC, obviously wetland regulations are, I hope they won't be honored in the breach. I understand about protecting vital infrastructure. So I know that to a certain extent, it's going to be a dilemma. And as a private individual who's lived here or been a summer resident all my life, I do hope we don't end up with long stretches of armored coastlines. Thank you.
Other committee members?
Madam Chairwoman?
Yes, Peter and then Graham.
Most of you know that I was a reporter for a long time for 2 different newspapers and a writer, local writer. I've seen a ton of these types of plans created, and as we all know, a lot of those end up on shelves, and I don't think that that's going to happen with this plan, but I think we need a way to show the public as we go along how all the actionable items are affecting people's lives, show them that the plan is happening. I don't know if I'm making sense, because otherwise it's this large monolithic thing up here in the sky that we have a plan, everything's okay. But so I guess this goes along with public education and keeping everybody involved and engaged. And yeah, that's what I got so far.
Thank you, Peter. And Graham?
Thank you, Mary. Jumping off of what we've heard a lot from you all at Arcadis, just making sure there's a lot of communication ongoing throughout this project. I know it looks like there will be, but just reiterating that it's very important to me and I think the rest of the committee.
Jen, and then Gary.
Okay. This is probably a repeat of things I know that we've told you before in our previous meetings and when we put the RFP together, but just the idea of something of success, what this project would look like in a successful way is that encompassing the whole island, you know, there's a tendency to focus in on just the built environment or the infrastructure, but that idea that the pieces that make Nantucket unique are not just, you know, our infrastructure and our built environment, but the natural pieces that are, you know, we have globally rare habitats, we have unique open spaces that don't exist almost anywhere else in the world, and building those together into what our solutions are, kind of that bigger picture, protecting what Nantucket is.
Thank you, Jen. And Gary?
I just want to make sure that since unlike the other members of our committee, Trevor, I'm a non-resident, and in theory, I represent 10 to 30,000 of the non-resident taxpayers who support and make successful the island of Nantucket. And I just want to make sure that at some point you figure out that we are stakeholders. We have important and interests in the island. We love the island, and all too often, decisions are made by the handful of people that show up at annual town meetings, and it's not the non-voting taxpayers. And I think we're an important stakeholder, and I want you to, hopefully you'll make a point to figure out how to get our views incorporated into some of your questions to the public. Thank you.
Okay, any remaining committee members with comments? Fritz, and I'll note your last name is McClure. It's not showing on the screen.
Okay. I just want to reiterate a little bit. I think it was Sarah's comment at the very beginning, and perhaps I'm being redundant, but I clearly would want to see that at the end of this, we have a sort of master plan to guide us going forward. And I think that's what Sarah was talking about in terms of actionable solutions. We don't want just another study that says we need another study. If that's, and that's all I have at this point.
Thank you, Fritz. Matt, did you have anything to add? I think you're the last one we haven't heard from.
No, I'm good.
Okay. Are there members of the public who wish to offer a comment? And just, yes, Peter, sorry.
I just wanted to add something that popped into my mind, kind of on what Ian was saying about not hard armoring the whole island. You know, obviously there are projects that already exist that serve various areas of the island, mostly by private residents. You know, there is the installations with soft armoring, if you will, in Pocomo. There's the Sconset Beach Preservation Fund's geotubes. There are various efforts that go on in Nantucket, and of course along the North Shore. There's got to be a way that we make all of those projects work into this plan, because the standalone project in one area, 8 neighbors get together and do something, and then the 8 neighbors on either side don't do anything, doesn't help at all to help the entire island, if that makes any sense.
And I'll add to that. I would hope that nothing that we do in one place causes trouble in another place, that this is truly an entire county-wide plan. You know, if we do something in Nantucket, hopefully that doesn't affect Tuckernuck. If we do something in Pocomo, hopefully that doesn't affect further up or down the harbor and so on.
Mary, or Madam Chair, can I please add one more thing?
Yeah.
So the other thing, and this once again, in reading through, I think this is part of the plan, but just to reiterate, I love in terms of success and the legacy, when there's a list of potentially actionable solutions, with help prioritizing those. I think sometimes they get prioritized by the town, in ways that aren't maybe the original intention of the plan. So whether it's prioritized by, as you say, the low-hanging fruit, the funds available, grant opportunities available for certain types of projects. I think that's helpful, but also additional, kind of prioritization that then this committee and others can use to move forward. I think that would be great.
I had one other comment, and that is that I have heard of other jurisdictions that included removal of existing projects in their plans. I'm not necessarily advocating for that, but I do want to note that that may be a potential factor in whatever comes out as a recommendation. Okay, Trevor, do we have time for public or do we need to move on?
Mary, Matt Fee, real quick.
Yes, Matt.
How are we going to pay for it? That's
Thanks,
mine.
Trevor, what's your pleasure for more comments?
I think we have a couple minutes if we want to, if there are any pressing public comments. I would just note that obviously there's going to be much more opportunity for public input and commentary throughout the process too. So
I cannot see most of the members of the public. They do not have video enabled, and we do not have a raise hand feature, unfortunately. So for the moment, if you have a comment, please just state your name. For the future, if you want to make a comment, send me a message in the chat so that I'm aware of that. That's probably the best way for us to recognize people. So anybody at the moment, if so, just state your name. Okay. Not hearing anything. I know it takes a minute sometimes to unmute. Trevor, why don't you go ahead with the next item? Great. Yeah, and I think just to reiterate a couple of themes that I heard in the discussion there. One I think the major one that I heard was the need for kind of this comprehensive approach that knits together individual projects that are implementable and that sort of actionable, but that they're knitted into a larger vision and comprehensive plan of the whole. And so I think that's interesting and very much kind of what our thinking is about how to approach this and what we want to deliver. And then I think picking up on that also this need for prioritization. You can't and you don't necessarily need to do everything at once, right? So breaking out recommendations into kind of a long-term plan of how investment will need to happen over the coming decades in order to achieve resilience against a future risk context that looks very different from today's. I think is a great point and something that we'll certainly be looking to build into the plan. And then yes, to Matt Fee's point, how do you pay for it? That'll be a part of funding recommendations. Will be a part of our plan as well. Great. So the next slide, I think we kind of touched on this as well. We don't necessarily need to go through these questions. You need to share the screen. Oh, my apologies. Yeah. Am I not sharing the screen at all?
So yes, you are, Trevor. I can see it.
Okay.
Mary, can you not?
Is anybody else having difficulty seeing the slides?
No, I can see them.
Okay.
There we go. I'm not seeing them, but it might, I think I know why, so go ahead, please.
Okay, great. Well, there was another just set of questions about critical elements and also just lessons learned from prior efforts. I don't think we need to necessarily step through these individually, just in the interest of time, but you know, we've already touched on some of these questions, in fact, but you know, just making sure, I think if as a follow-up to this meeting, if any members of the committee have specific guidance, I think particularly on planning efforts from the past, what hasn't worked or what is not been so successful, you know, those are pitfalls that we would certainly like to avoid if we can. So we're very receptive to comments on that front. So let me kind of walk through as a next stage the sort of roles and responsibilities and how we're thinking about the Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee's role in this process. And then would like to hear from you about the role you would like to play. Basically, everyone on Nantucket has a role to play in making this project a success. And it's kind of a nested framework of different groups and stakeholders who will ideally all be involved and all have a role in informing and vetting solutions as we move towards the final deliverable. So,
Trevor, if I can interrupt, I'm sorry. Yeah. We do have a question. Can you elaborate on the stakeholders? Who are they? How will they be identified? And who has already been identified as a stakeholder?
Yes, and actually, yeah. We have there are a number of slides that speak to that later in the presentation. So if it's okay if I could answer that or touch on that a bit later, is that all right?
Thank you.
Great. So yes, so sort of at the center of the process is our consultant team who will be working to undertake analysis and devise preliminary solutions. Then we have the Town of Nantucket project management team who will be kind of our first lens of vetting. So if you think about sort of draft materials, would go through, Vince and his colleagues with the town. And then once they've sort of been finalized to a certain extent, we would look to bring those materials to the Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee for further review and refinement before bringing those, be it public engagement materials or draft recommendations out to the larger network of stakeholders from, the general public, both on island and off island, and then specific key stakeholder groups, advocacy organizations, landowners, and so forth. And the arrows, I mean, it intended to kind of show that the information is flowing in both directions. We're reporting out, and then the community is reporting back to us about what is important. And directives, obviously we are working for the town and we want to support your goals and objectives. So as we get feedback such as today, we'll be integrating that into our approach and trying to meet those objectives, which is why we're asking these questions up front. So the committee role, we do see the Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee as the primary citizen-led steering committee for this project. And kind of the things that we are looking for from you as a project team are that you support accurate information integration and responsive sound decision-making on our part, that you help us vet and refine the process and the outcomes prior to sharing those process-based deliverables and outcomes with other stakeholders, that you're maximizing the kind of practicability and equity of our process and solutions, helping us to identify where we need to work to achieve greater equity in our process. Really be ambassadors of the plan and the process. So helping us communicate outwards what it is that this project is trying to achieve, who's working on it, and how people can become involved. And then helping to calibrate the project approach into direction. So helping us calibrate our engagement strategy, for example, catalyst actions, the communication of risk, evaluation criteria, scenario development, and then implementation strategy and funding. We're not looking for you to do our work for us. We'll certainly be developing these materials, but as I mentioned earlier, you folks know, the community knows the community best. And so there are inevitably going to be times when we need to rely on the Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee to help guide us in the right direction, so that we're making sure that we're meeting your expectations. I can pause there or keep moving. Mary, is there, maybe as chair, are there other roles that the Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee has contemplated through the RFP development process or otherwise that you see yourselves wanting to play in this process?
I'm going to have to punt to Vince, if you don't mind, Vince. I think that we can certainly continue to develop this as needed.
Yeah, I agree with Mary. We can absolutely develop this as needed. I was just reading it there. It looks fine to me, but I'm very happy to take suggestions from committee members and the public and forward on as needed. I must also say people can review this afterwards, because Arcadis are going to send me this. This will be posted on the Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee website afterwards, so people will have a second chance to review this.
Great.
Mary, wait, can I have it? Sorry.
There.
Sure.
Yeah, so one thing that the committee has done in the recent past we formed an education subcommittee, which we might be discussing the future of that subcommittee, but as part of the committee role, is there an opportunity or an interest, or what is the interest in additional education and outreach materials? So both is Arcadis going to be producing some materials for the outreach, like post-plan or throughout the process of the plan? And maybe part of the CRAC committee would be some helping distribute some of those materials.
Great. Yeah, I think that's a great one. Certainly we'll be developing materials for our outreach, and I think having your assistance both during the meetings, but also outside of the formal meeting time of the Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee to help propagate those materials outward is ideal. For example, one near-term thing would be sort of a community-wide survey, right? And helping through your individual and professional networks, helping to ensure that survey adequately reaches the community would be very much appreciated.
Jen has her hand up.
Yep, just real quick, if I may. Thank you, Mary. I just wanted to say that as the Coastal Resiliency Advisory Committee, each of the members are made up to represent particular groups and also the community at large. And so while I think it's important to have on here that we're ambassadors of the plan and the process, we also serve the alternate side where we are the ambassadors of the community and our different organizations, and not just representing the voice of the organizations and people, but representing the other communities and organizations on the island, such as the Conservation Commission that has things that they actually have to implement in regulations, the planning board. And so while vetting outcomes and processes before sharing them with the other stakeholders, we're also the committee that can kind of provide that advice and information on whether suggestions and solutions actually fit into what we could do on the island. And so I want to make sure that we're fitting a role that is not kind of just the final vetting process before it goes out to the community, but part of that conversation around those solutions as they get developed.
Any other comments from committee members at this point? I don't see any. Trevor, if you want to go ahead.
Great, thank you. Yeah, and I think that those were all great points. So this is just a laying out kind of what the primary kind of touch points with the Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee will be over the project. So we're here obviously in late November, kicking off our interaction with you. We imagine our next interaction with or sort of presentation to the committee will be in January, where we'll look to be vetting preliminary analyses and hypotheses, and then review kind of our approach for phase 2 of community engagement. In March, we'll then review kind of our risk and vulnerability analysis in the mid-project report. Sometime in the April-May timeframe, we'd be looking to vet preliminary resilience and adaptation strategies and then review phase 3 of community engagement. And then finally in the August-September, as we begin to wrap up, we'd look for opportunities to vet and review final recommendations and to review the approach for our final kind of phase of engagement. And I would say these are the major kind of times when we would come and have a public meeting with the committee and present to you, but our door is always open. And so, you know, if there are ideas or materials or data that you would like to share, Vince has offered to be the conduit and to receive those materials and make sure that they reach me and the rest of the project team. And I think, you know, we can be flexible and try to achieve, you know, information sharing that is to the service of the project throughout. So if we think that there's an approach that might work better in terms of our interaction with the committee, we can certainly have that discussion. So now I'd like to present the community engagement approach at a high level. And Amy or Chelsea, I would also welcome your chiming in here at any moment. We've been working on devising this together. The engagement approach that's captured here has a companion companion document that is includes much more detail, that we will take feedback from today and integrate into that and then circulate to the Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee for further feedback. And then finally, that plan would be hosted on the project website, so that we're achieving, you know, full transparency with the community about how we're approaching engagement. So we have developed a number of principles that will guide our work. Those are, firstly, diversity, equity, inclusion. We will look to be fostering optimism and energy around the plan. You know, resilience and risk reduction can be serious material, and it can also be off-putting to certain members of a community or inaccessible. And sometimes, frankly, it is cast in a very pessimistic light. And I think in order to do, you know, to work in the space of resilience, you have to have a long-term optimism about the future. We'll be aiming for co-creation, so working closely with the community to create solutions. And then finally, public health and safety. And so, you know, that relates to ensuring that we are not putting anybody in an uncomfortable position related to the COVID-19 pandemic, and that we're creating plentiful opportunities to engage with the project in a safe way. This is a set of diagrams that just sort of captures kind of a overall framework of engagement, where we're trying to achieve both broad outreach and then deep outreach. And broad outreach means, you know, we're trying to engage as many people as we can around awareness and sort of larger, more high-level questions about what we're trying to achieve. And that's, you know, ensuring that the community overall understands what's happening and that they have an opportunity to provide their input. Then there is kind of deep engagement, which is a smaller subset of the community that is engaged more intensively multiple times over the project. And those are stakeholders who will be you know, most interested and who will have a critical role to play in the implementation of the plan. So think of, you know, major property owners, town staff, Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee members. These are people who will be most deeply engaged through our process. And we'll have different activities and different approaches tailored to both of these objectives. The question about stakeholders, here you go. This is a list, a representative list, and I'm certainly not going to read all of these. We do have the list as a companion document, but really thinking about the different groups of stakeholders here. So there's the local government who will own the plan and sort of help drive it forward to implementation. You know, but the government is not a monolithic thing, right? There's a lot of different entities that are involved that all need to be engaged and coordinated around the plan. conservation and nonprofit organizations. Certainly Nantucket has a robust community of advocacy and conservation organizations, some of whom, like the Nantucket Conservation Foundation, are significant property owners and will need to be, significantly involved in the solutions that are recommended. Private stakeholders, everything from small business owners to residents, to utilities, to the Chamber of Commerce. These are groups that will need to be involved in terms of the overall impact of the plan to the sort of economic and community vitality of Nantucket. And then there are state and federal organizations that will be involved both as property owners, regulators, and sort of information, technical information providers.
Trevor, if I may just make a note here. You list small business owners. I think that workers also need to be represented as a group. And you list residents, and I want to make sure that that includes both renters, owners, seasonal residents, and year-round residents, just to make sure that those groups are represented individually because they do have different concerns.
Great, yes, thank you.
Madam Chair, can I make a comment, please? Thank you. One other thing, in line with your DEI bullet point previously, is to make sure there are, meetings held in additional languages or materials translated. And as part of the community engagement, I think that's an important piece because we do have, a significant population of Spanish speaking and Portuguese speaking individuals, multiple other languages as well. But I think, to hit the larger target groups, I think making sure we have some translated materials or even translated meetings as we move forward might be helpful with the community engagement approach.
Mary?
Fritz, please. Fritz, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Just as I look down the list, one minor comment, as I look down the list, I see police department, fire department, natural resources, and it says planning board. I certainly the planning board ought to be involved, but I think it's the planning department is probably more vital in terms of a stakeholder and talking to the department heads as opposed to the planning board itself. That's just a minor comment. The major comment that I would have is this is a very comprehensive but large list. And we do have to have the engagement of all of these entities. Some perhaps more than others at a more detailed level. So in other words, some of these stakeholders are people who should be involved, should have the opportunity to comment, should participate. There are others that I think that are vitally important that they participate. And I think it's vitally important that we are monitoring through this process if they are not participating. The last thing I would want to see is to go through this whole process. And at the end, somebody who's not participated says, oh, that won't work. And the answer obviously is where have you been, but that's not going to resolve the issue. So I'll give you an example. I think it's vitally important that all of the town departments are engaged. And I would say specifically that I think Arcadis should be meeting with the heads of those departments to ensure their engagement. Second, I will simply say there may be someone on this list who I might guess are somewhat more reluctant stakeholders who might be willing or consistently engage. Just to throw out one, National Grid has a tendency to be fairly independent thinkers when they come to Nantucket. And so I would hate to see us go through this whole process, have National Grid have absolutely nothing to do with the process, and then in the end say, well, we can't do that. So that's just an example. National Grid I just picked. There are others, obviously. The Steamship Authority probably is another one. They're just larger entities that I think we have to understand it may be more difficult to engage them and can't simply assume that they will self-engage. Thank you.
Thank you, Fritz. Do we have other comments from members of the committee? Seeing none, Trevor, back to you.
Great, thank you. Excellent, Fritz. I think excellent point about the need to be proactive. We will be tracking who engages with us to the extent that we're able to collect information. And one of the goals in doing that is that we're able to identify who is not engaging, and develop tailored strategies to make sure that we are getting to those folks. National Grid is a good example where I think we need to have a dedicated, more, I think, tailored and proactive approach. Probably the same goes for folks like the Coast Guard, entities that are maybe see themselves not as integrated with the community, let's say. And then just engagement goals. I'll quickly run through these. We are looking to engage and collect input from a diversity of voices. Thank you for the comment on language inclusivity, certainly part of our thinking on this. Empowering the community with information and knowledge, creating a platform for collaboration and two-way engagement, specifically on the definition and evaluation of risk and the co-creation of solutions. Providing a multifaceted and mutually valuable experience. People to engage, people have to want to engage, and there needs to be a reason for them want to do so, and that is about the value that they get out of the experience. Channeling and coordinating efforts that enable climate and environmental justice. Helping community members internalize and identify with their responsibility and power to participate and help build resilience on Nantucket, and then identifying and cultivating those champions, those sort of players on the island who are going to drive the implementation of this project and carry forward the work in the decades to come. And we talked a lot about implementation. We think about implementation as, we want this plan to develop proposals that grow legs and walk out the door, so that they grow up and they become actual built, enjoyed infrastructure projects, whether green, gray, or policy and regulatory solutions. So, we have a couple of different ways that we think about this. Stakeholder engagement, who could affect or be affected by the processes and its outcomes. When we think about scoping deliverables, what does that final report look like, and how can we develop it in a way that maximizes its accessibility, utility, and leverage for the town? Making sure that we are developing practical solutions that have clear, identifiable pathways to implementation. That there's adequate support that is being developed and empowered through the process. And then finally, fundability. So making sure that recommendations are developed in a way that has a clear business case. And I mentioned, we have different waves of engagement. I think, Fritz, you raised the idea of certain community members and stakeholders needing to have sort of more intensive engagement. This is a first pass at kind of the phase one listening tour that we've already sort of begun with folks that we talked to during our site tour, and we'll be continuing through December. So this is a list of member community groups that we would look to be having kind of 1 hour interviews with as we start the process. And we can certainly collect additional feedback on this. I've shared the list with Vince, and we can share that out to this group for additional ideas on who we absolutely need to engage right away. Moving quickly now, Mary, I think we only have about a half hour in the scheduled time left. These are just some questions. Maybe we can open it up for a minute or two if there's any responses to these questions about goals or principles that we're missing, what kinds of engagement approaches have worked well in Nantucket and what kind of haven't. and then sort of thoughts about the effect that the virtual environment might have on what works and what won't. And then again, who are the stakeholders we must engage early and often? You know, we maybe open it up for 5 or so minutes and then we can carry forward.
Okay, so I'm going to open up to the public as well as the committee members. Again, if you're a member of the public, please send me a quick chat message indicating you'd like to speak. Do we have any committee members with comments at this time? Sarah, please.
You know, I think that in different committees in different ways, we found that the virtual actually brings more engagement of the community. Oftentimes it's been really difficult for people to go to small meetings. I know with like school committee, for example, there's been higher attendance than any other committee meetings in the past because of the availability of virtual. So I think that actually almost works to the benefit now. How has it worked? I'm curious from your perspective with other, I know from the proposal, you were in the middle of some of the planning phases for some previous projects. How did it work with COVID from the transition to like a lot of public meetings to a lot more virtual? Like, what was your experience, Trevor?
Well, I think, yeah, it's been interesting, and I will allow Amy to chime in here too in a moment. But, you know, I think after the initial kind of disruption of switching to virtual, once everybody kind of got their virtual legs, so to speak, we've seen a very similar kind of evolution where there's been a lot more involvement in engagement activities because people don't, you know, it's not as disruptive to participate as it would have been if you had to get in the car or take the, you know, subway to an engagement event. You know, I think we have to remain very cognizant of, you know, sort of the digital divide and people's ability to access internet and utilize computers for engagement. So I think as long as you can maintain attention to that and mitigate those effects as best you can, it does seem to be presenting a much more you know, generating a lot of more participation in engagement activities. And I think the other thing I would add is that I've always felt, regardless of COVID, this project would require having a virtual strategy anyway because of the on-off island dynamic and seasonality of the population. That if we want you know, folks who are off island for the winter to be engaged in this process, they need a way to do so remotely. So I don't think there would ever be a non-virtual strategy for a Nantucket planning, coastal resilience planning process on Nantucket. Amy, did you have any other observations to add from Stoss's work?
Yeah, I mean, I think I would just mostly support that, you know, we are seeing pretty good attendance to the virtual sessions that we're holding. I think it has, it's changed maybe the way in which we hold a meeting and kind of what we anticipate might come out of it. You know, so rather than having one big long meeting, we've broken things up in ways to just offer a little bit more time to have a dialogue, since that's harder. You know, it kind of tends to lend itself more towards present, respond, and less talking about things, which there's a lot that comes out through that kind of non-informal portion of a meeting that is helpful. So, you know, we're working on ways to mimic that, you know, through the process. And you'll see we have a little bit of an exercise today also that, you know, we're gonna try out and see ways to get responses through the virtual, whereas I think that's the other challenge. It's less, I think, so to summarize that, I think actually the attendance is better, but being able to really get targeted responses to questions that help us move forward can in some ways be a little more challenging. So it forces some creativity on our end on, you know, how we do that. And actually, I think we're finding too that, you know, most people have internet. I was just having a conversation yesterday with the kind of equity researcher. They may need some support and assistance. So it's less about, you know, it's about setting up the right structure to enable access to the tools, you know, but generally there's pretty good distribution of internet. So that's been, you know, I'm kind of also trying to learn a bit about that from the sort of diversity equity lens too. Yeah.
I'll add one thing. We do have two people who would like to comment. Vince, are you able to unmute people? I'm not able to, and they're not able to either. I chatted the names to you. My comment is that we're going to have meetings available to the public at different dates and times. It can't be during the workday all the time. So that may mean a Saturday. It may even mean a Sunday. I don't know when people are available. Certainly evenings as opposed to daytime. It's just something we'll have to keep in mind in order to provide an opportunity for people to participate. If we're able to unmute Kate Shea, she does have a comment, and then Bruce Mandel also has a comment.
Am I unmuted? I am not certain. Are you?
You're good, Kate. Go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm listening to the conversation about community engagement being a prime focus of Arcadis's work, and I totally support that. But my comment is that I think it's really important that the community and all aspects of the community's input be solicited after a really in-depth education about the kind of the scientific basis of the kind of climate change risks the island is facing, so that there is a shared understanding of what those risks are. I think there has been solicitation of community input about people's priorities in the past, but that it wasn't premised on a shared understanding of what the scientific assumptions were about what the planning was going to be based on. So I do want to say that I think, although community engagement at the outset is really important, that there needs to be transparency about what the assumptions are about things like levels of sea rise, extreme weather events, etc.
Thank you, Kate. Can we go to Bruce?
Thank you. I'm very interested in the phasing of the work, and primarily, of course, West End issues, Nantucket, our South Shore, the erosion, the destruction of the intersection at Ames and Nantucket Road, and access to Smith Point. Of course, these are more immediate issues, but I think that some of these organizations like the Nantucket Conservation Association ought to be part of the phase one engagement rather than waiting to react later. And I was wondering if that would be possible, representing several hundred West End property owners and concerned with access to areas of the West End. I think it's important to be engaged earlier rather than later.
Thank you, Bruce. I will note that the Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee did have a meeting focused on current projects in the Nantucket area. That meeting is available on the town's website as a recording. And we are planning a meeting for Tuckernuck and Muskeget as well. That should be the second meeting in December, although it's tentative at the moment. We do recognize that those are areas of significant concern. And I would encourage people in other parts of the island to make their concerns known as well. It's definitely the entire county of Nantucket that is involved here. Trevor, back to you.
Great, thank you. And yes, I think, Bruce, thank you for that comment. There's certainly opportunity to add more, potential stakeholders to that phase one. That's why we're here today talking to the committee and to the public. So thank you. I'm going to move quickly now because I think we can sort of move through these next two slides rapidly to get to the exercise, which we do want to get to. So this is just kind of engagement tools that we'll be using, from the town's website to social media to more traditional kind of potentially printed flyers and materials, email lists, public meetings, interviews, focus groups. So sort of the broad suite of toolkits. I think with COVID, we've seen a turn towards as we were just talking about kind of virtual or digital engagement. So, you know, we will be looking to help support Vince in developing a project website that will be the, you know, kind of go-to resource for information on this project. We do have the opportunity to use kind of more innovative mapping and survey tools, both at web-based and app-based. There's a number of different things we can do that won't require human activity or human person-to-person interaction is what I'm trying to say. So sharing informational pamphlets and then, you know, sort of equipping stakeholders with or groups with kind of activities for youth and other demographics to learn about and become engaged in the project. And then, you know, as well, sort of distance engagement. There are different tools that can be used, from socially distanced, safe site walks and tours to the development of materials that, you know, increase awareness about the project. And then just in terms of the phases, you know, we do have this sort of first phase that's underway as we speak. Phase 2 would be a broader outreach to the public through workshops and surveys beginning early in the new year. Then, you know, in spring, phase 3, and then finally phase 4 spans really the sort of second half of the project as we're empowering the community for implementation. And this is just to zoom in on the sort of phase 1 schedule. So with that, let's move to our mapping exercise. This is going to be, I'm going to switch out of PowerPoint here and share a different screen. So bear with me for a moment. And what we are looking to do is to, one moment, is to use a tool called Miro. Some folks may be familiar with it, but we'd like to have just sort of an interactive conversation with the Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee, as well as with any members of the public who would like to provide input on, you know, sort of the primary resilience related challenges and opportunities in a place-based fashion. So some questions to be thinking about are, you know, where have you seen flooding in the past? Where are erosion issues most pronounced? Where would you, you know, where do you have ideas about what needs to be done? We only have about 20 minutes left here, so I don't expect that we will be able to cover everything or the entire island. However, this tool will be available in link form for folks to access afterwards, and we'll also export a PDF so can collect additional feedback through that. And I'll just walk through quickly to get sort of orient everyone. I like to think of this as kind of being in a virtual meeting room. So imagine that if I zoom out here, imagine that these boards are all in a room around, and we're all seated around a table, and we're looking at individual parts of the island and seeking feedback. So as I present through, what we have here is an island-wide base map that shows building structures, the transportation network, as well as ecological resources. We have an aerial imagery of the island. And then we have here a map that shows zones of risk based on elevation. So it shows projected erosion lines from the recent released FEMA report that we will be looking at and refining as we undertake our hazard assessment approach. But this sort of provides a project baseline. And then we have zones of flood risk based on elevation and topography. So high risk areas are those areas that are below 5 feet in elevation relative to mean high water. Moderate risk are between 10 and 15 feet, and then low risk would be anything below 15 feet, excuse me, of elevation. And this is just the beginning to our sort of risk assessment approach. We'll be developing a much more detailed and robust approach as we move through the project. And then we have zoom in maps that show specific areas. So you know, we know that this is obviously an all island plan, but one of the most vulnerable locations across the island to sea level rise and storm surge is, of course, central Nantucket and the old historic district. So I think we would like to start there with a conversation about primary coastal resilience challenges, resilience opportunities, and kind of what's most important for us to know about the downtown area.
So you're looking for comments from the committee members to start, is that correct?
Correct, yes. And Amy, you may see a cursor in the background. We have Post-it notes, so Amy will be adding your comments to the map as we go.
Okay, Gary, go ahead, please.
Well, I saw that picture at the beginning when you were taking your tour. There you were walking along Easton Street about 100 feet from my home. And that's the issue that we've been dealing with, is all that stormwater coming from the mid-island flowing down into Brant Point, and with nowhere to go, and with the pumps often not working at Children's Beach. The conservation land behind our home was 32 acres, used to be a baseball field. Now I call it Lake Brant Point, especially when there's high tides and storm surges. So hopefully you're familiar with that, and that's an area that I hope you'll be focusing on in the future.
We certainly did see the over the course of that day, November 12th, it was the amount of water that collected in that open space was pretty remarkable.
Other committee members? And if I'm not able to see you, please just go ahead and give me a shout.
Fritz?
Fritz, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure. I may be stating the obvious, but it sounds like we want to focus on specific issues, so I'll focus on them. From an infrastructure, well, simply this particular area, the downtown Old Historic District, also happens to be the center of our transportation hub. The boats, for instance, coming in, that's number one. Number two, it's also the center of where all of the electric cables from the come in and are located there on around Candle Street in a single building, and then from there go out to the rest of the island. There is discussion by National Grid as to whether or not another cable at some point may be required, and if so, the issue would be where would that cable go or be laid? Simply where it is now, or does there need to be a rethinking of that whole issue? Third, I would simply point out in Nantucket, from the town, all the sewage flows downtown to the lowest level and then gets pumped back out to Surfside. So you have that whole issue of sewage, the sewage system, and the fact that it gets pumped from the very lowest areas in that historic downtown area. I'll stop there.
I'm going to build on what Fritz said. I imagine that adapting the actual port side facilities for the boats is not that difficult, but we have a real challenge in the land-based access to those facilities. We already have flooding issues if you're trying to get to the Steamship Authority, sunny day, high tide flooding, and storm flooding. And so it's not restricted to making sure the boats can get here. It's also, can we get to the boats is a question. Sarah, go ahead.
Yeah, so just to add to some of what we've been talking about, obviously downtown in our town infrastructure is vitally important, but kind of taking a different scale approach moving to the west. I'm concerned often about Nantucket Road and Eel Point roads, both of which with different sea level rise scenarios are all predicted to have some flooding and be cut off. And so thinking about, as we look at the island as a whole, how do we provide emergency facilities to our constituents in Nantucket, Eel Point, and then, so those are kind of the concerns of, you know, that kind of infrastructure. I know there's other areas that are similarly where roads are shown to be kind of pinched off. And then I noticed when you were showing the maps, one of the questions was where are opportunities or, you know, benefits. And I think, you know, Jen could speak more to this, but we have a number of different salt marshes throughout the island. And so opportunities would be to support the functioning of our salt marshes and other natural wetlands that, you know, can help filter water. So supporting the natural resources that we already have on the island to kind of function the way they're supposed to function, and maybe expanding those if possible would be a way to, instead of starting from scratch, kind of expanding with what we already have.
Vince?
I just want to make sure Art Gasparo gets a chance to speak.
All right, go ahead, Art, if you had something to add.
Oh, thanks, Madam Chair. I would just ask that you keep in mind the boat ramps and how critical they are to our infrastructure, and that, you know, we rebuilt the ramp not too many years ago, but that they're also adjusted and taken into account, because it's a real choke point, and especially with the, you know, increase in sea level rise, that infrastructure is also appropriately accounted for and upgraded, really all three of them. Thank you.
And Art, just to clarify, you're talking about the facilities for private boats to launch, not talking about the Steamship Authority and the High Line. And you said there are three, is that 2 in town and 1 in Nantucket, or am I not getting that right?
No, there's Children's Beach in town, F Street in Nantucket, and Jackson Point in Nantucket.
And what about Washington Street Extension?
I would say that that's not really a formal infrastructure. I mean, some people launch from a beach there. If it could get us another one, that would be great.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. Sorry, what was that location? Washington Street?
Washington Street Extension, as Art said, it's an informal access point, but it is one that is heavily used when storms are coming for people to pull their boats out of the harbor.
Oh, great.
And there may be other informal access points that we should catalog and pay attention to. Fritz, go ahead.
Could you also, could you also clarify the one in Nantucket?
I'm not familiar. Art, can you give Amy more information?
Sure. So there's the Walter Barrett Pier at F Street, and then at Jackson Point is the other boat ramp.
Okay, thank you.
And then back to Fritz, please.
Yes, I just would mention, and I'm not sure what the status of it is, but when you're talking about launching boats, there is that travel lift facility that really was a part of the old boatyard where the Great Harbor Yacht Club is. And I'm not sure how that's operating or not, but you still do have that piece of infrastructure, which is right next to that informal boat ramp on Washington Street Extension that we were just talking about.
And that's Washington Street Extension, that's in town, that's not in Nantucket, just to keep all the consultants familiar with what we're talking about.
No, it's tremendously helpful. I wasn't sure. We did visit this marina here and noticed. Vince can perhaps remind me of the name of it, which escapes me at the moment. But just that it's a significant, you know, off-season boat storage there, but also, you know, significantly vulnerable, of course.
Yes, Trevor, that's Nantucket Marine, and for Amy's benefit, the F Street boat ramp is where we met. Bill Greeder, and the other one is where we saw the scallopers from at the tip of Jackson's Point.
And Madam Chair, if I may, Ian Golding,
yes,
there also used to be access at Berkeley Avenue off of Monomoy Road until it was closed off, I don't know, 10 years ago or so. Opposite, you know, on the other side of the boatyard there by the creeks.
Thank you, Ian. I think these are all really good things. A resource that is not currently used but was used in the past might be something that can be reactivated for the community's benefit. So I'm really glad that we're pointing some of these out, especially if they're not currently on a map.
Mary?
Yes, Prita, go ahead.
I just want to reiterate the access points, myself being the representative for the Harbor and Shellfish Advisory Board. The access points are all vital to bay scallopers, so all of those need to be maintained. I had 4 other things off of Fritz's comments about there may be stakeholders who are operating out of the loop that need to be brought into the loop, such as the Steamship Authority. And perhaps this has already been thought of, but the Steamship Authority vehicle loading ramps only go so high. They only angle so high. That should be something that should be, until such time as maybe we do develop another place where the ferries dock, that should be addressed. It should be on the list.
Peter, can I add on to that? I am aware that in Woods Hole, the Steamship Authority had to modify their slip reconstruction because of changes in the sea level. And I'm trying to get more information from them on that. But yes, it's a very good point, and thank you for making it here. And then continue, and then we'll go to Vince when Peter's done.
Okay. I don't know how much of this is of consequence, and I know I'm going to be entering territory of other representatives on this committee, but CO2 being basically our natural block of the ocean, and it may be being at best 6 to 8 feet high over sea level. We lose CO2, we're getting the open ocean hitting us, and eventually we know we'll probably have openings at the Haulover, at Cascada Pond, and openings at the Gulls. And I know this is an area for Jen Carberg, and she can definitely speak to this more than I can, but being a person who knows the island well, I know that these are very vulnerable spots. We're extremely fortunate to have CO2 in the Haulover protecting the harbor. We have a harbor because of all that, so those need to be noted. Also, for all of us who's been following along what's been happening at the end of Hummock Pond Road, and how the beach has narrowed a lot, and the danger of the water coming into Hummock Pond. I don't think it's going to happen all at once, but it is a storm pathway, and that should be noted, as should Long Pond. There are a lot of residents along that pond, and also Maya Comet. And then one last thing, one of our stakeholders is the Army Corps of Engineers, which 3 years ago now rebuilt our jetties, and we need to be aware of that. We need to be aware of they're only half-tide jetties, and once they're submerged, that's going to affect us. So that's it.
Madam Chair.
I promised Vince, I have a comment from the public, and then we'll come back to you, Ian, if that works.
Absolutely, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. Very small, very quick point. I just wanted to recognize that Mary and myself have been working to attempt to have talks with Steamship Authority over time on a number of issues, and with some success.
Vince, can you unmute Steve Lineback?
Yes.
He had a comment, and that I think it's important that we mention it. It may be something that we need to take offline after that, but please, Steve, if you have the opportunity to comment, go ahead.
Just 1 second. Then, Steve, you should be able to unmute yourself. I think you're good now, Steve. No.
Okay, I'll read Steve's comment, and then I think that's a question that we'll have to take out outside the meeting. Steve said, I have lived in Monomoy my entire life, and Berkeley Avenue was not a boat launching point, FYI. So we'll just note that that might need further research. And I believe, Ian, we're back to you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I used to launch back in the early 80s. I used to launch one of my skiffs there, and but maybe that doesn't qualify. However, I just wanted to add to what Peter had said, which ties into my earlier question about whether sand volumes, when I was referring to sand volumes and going forward, and whether the town would be better served with a town-owned sand source. That, you know, that is specifically if we need to protect the haulover or CO2 at some point in the future. And that was the same direction that my suggestion about possible floodgates or pilings and expanding the jetties. So I'm just adding to what Peter said. Thank you.
Thank you, Ian. I see that Diane Coombs has joined us. Diane, did you have something you wanted to add, or are you just unmuted by accident?
No. I didn't mean to. Do you hear me?
We can hear you, yes.
Okay, what I did want to say, having been a scalloper for many, many years, I think that the Berkeley Street entry thing over on Monomoy was mostly used from the water going in. It was the whole little coast on both sides of the old pier. And it was a safe place to bring a boat in if you had to, because of the sand beach. It was not any formal entry place. It was just one that people who particularly scallop knew was there and used on bringing their boats in. That's that. I just wanted to give a little opinion on that because I spent time there 10 years.
Thank you, Diane. And would you mute yourself now that you've made that comment? Yep. In the spirit of adding things on here, I want to make sure that the consultants are aware that Nantucket has a shellfishing industry. It is a source of income, it is a source of heritage, and it is something that is very important to the quality of life on Nantucket. That industry, I don't think I'm exaggerating when I say it's in trouble. So that is something that we would want to try and make sure that it can continue. I'm certainly not the expert on that, but I did want to bring that up. Do we have other comments? Amy, did you have a question? And
just a quick clarification on that. I know we saw and heard a lot about the scallopers. Is that the primary industry, or are there others that are also significant, other species there? Maybe
Peter can probably answer that best, if you will, Peter.
In terms of the fall, that's the primary industry from November 1 to March 31st. You also have the conch fishery, which is, I believe, April till December. And that conch is just a local term for the whelk snail, the smooth whelk snail. There are also people who fish for striped bass, but that's offshore. There's some quahog digging, some blue mussels, but basically the scallop fishery is the primary fishery. And I just wanted to slip in this one addition to what Mary said about the importance of the fishery. The fishery doesn't exist without eelgrass. It is our primary habitat on the bottom of the ocean, or on the bottom of the harbor. So when I was saying that you know, the very real chance that CO2 gets broken up or even submerged will change the dynamic of our eelgrass beds. Maybe it'll help because pollution in the harbor will get washed out, but then it'll make the shoreline from Monomoy to Wauwinet a lot more active with waves breaking and maybe even harm our eelgrass. So we got to take that into consideration.
Again, I'm not the expert, but we also have oyster farming going on in the head of the harbor. I'm not sure if we still have lobstering along the jetties or other places. And then we have clams and quahogs that are taken. I don't know if there's a commercial season for those, but aside from the commercial activity, it's a part of many people's lives is to harvest shellfish in one way or another. And again, don't know all the rules and regs. I happen to be allergic to shellfish, so it's not an area where I pay a lot of attention. I think we have Stephen Lineback. He was mentioning the oyster farms. Stephen, is there anything else you wanted to add?
beg your pardon, Stephen, you may need to unmute your computer as well.
He's showing is unmuted on my screen, but he may have been satisfied with just the chat about the oyster farms. Fritz, hang on a sec. So we do have another public comment asking me just to read it. This is from Yvonne Valancourt, and it says, Jen can speak to this, but I just wanted to add that Pulpus Road floods at very high tides with storm surges at Folgers Marsh. The culvert is small, blocked, and the marsh continues on the south side of the road and could absorb more water with some attention or changes.
Further down.
And then we'll go to
Road Pond, that large marsh there. That's the one we saw in the field.
This location, Jen?
Yeah, right there on the Pulpus Road where you can kind of tell marsh comes up to the road. That's where we stood on the bike path and looked at that non-functional, poorly functioning culvert.
Okay, Fritz, and then we have another public comment.
I just really wanted to reiterate the lobster farm. I mean the oyster farming in the upper harbor, and just make sure that the Arcadis understands that's been a growing industry here. It's a farming industry, but it's important and becoming more important.
Thank you, Fritz. We have a comment from Deanne Atherton. Vince, can you unmute her?
Thank you, Mary. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I just wanted to mention to the consulting team that to be mindful of core community values that have evolved over our history. And one of them is access to the water. And we have spent a lot of time as a community trying to maintain access. And a resource for you might be the town's Roads and Right-of-Way Committee. And they're the ones who really keep their eye on water access. And we would hate to lose that in terms of building our resiliency. Thank you.
Thank you, Deanne. Sarah, and give me everybody on the committee who wants to speak, put your hand up because I heard a lot of voices. So I see Sarah. Was there anybody else? Okay,
Mary,
go ahead.
you may have heard me, Mary. I was going to ask a clarifying question, but I'd rather hear from the committee, so it's okay.
Okay, so we have Sarah and then Holly and then Trevor. You can ask a couple of questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was going to reiterate some of what Deanne just brought up, which was about public access to waterways. I would hate for a lot of our water access to be privatized. And then, you know, we have the town pier, which is on Washington Street, which, you know, is an area I know you toured and is a highly vulnerable area. And so we want to make sure that the town pier is still available. And then the only other thing, just because we've been talking about it, was a lot of talk was about the shell fisheries and the fishing that happens in the Nantucket immediacy, but we do have a maritime history, and there are a lot of people that leave from the island to go to fish, whether it's recreational, charter fishing, and you know, fishing. People fish for tuna and sell their tuna, so there is a fishing. It's part of our history and our maritime traditions, as well as you know, the current activities. And so, along with the public boat launches and things that people have been brought up, I would also, you know, I'm sure it's on your list to talk to the harbor master about the emergency preparedness for like working with Great Harbor Yacht Club when there's a storm and they're supposed to be helping, you know, take boats out of the water when there's like a kind of quick all hands on deck thing. So kind of, I think it would help the community with this plan to reiterate some of the things that were maybe like past history that needs to be reminded of people, you know, where those public launches are, maybe where some of those older places where people used to launch from, or even if not regularly launching from, but where there's emergency, you know, places to haul boats out kind of thing. I think that that would be great to have on a map to speak to people so that we know where those areas are and that they're maintained in that way. So even though they're in some other plans here and there, to Peter's point earlier, some of those plans get put on a shelf, and it's good to remind everyone again where those public access points are.
Thank you, Sarah. And Holly, you had something you wanted to add.
Yes, thanks, Madam Chair, and thank you, Arcadis. Appreciate this for the public and the Coastal Resiliency Advisory Committee. This is very important. I just wanted to notate the Folgers Marsh comment as on Popus Road, as well as Sacajah Pond. I think I pointed that out to you all when you were here, that those are priorities within our HMP, taken over from the update in 2007 and then the recent update 2 years ago. I just want to notate that, you know, I think you all are aware of this, but I just want to reiterate to the general public is that the priorities that are associated within our hazard mitigation plan, HMP, they're a living document. These are actionable items. And of course, having them identified or possibly given a different course of action, something through this whole process would definitely be beneficial. I do know that you all will be looking at, or if you haven't already, our large HMP to see those priorities that have been called out that are important and are a part of this whole process. I also just wanted to emphasize, I think Peter was really good about talking about the importance of COTU, obviously for many reasons, but also our history in general. And I do want to annotate that I believe, and don't quote me, but I believe it was in 1898 or 1896 where Hullover actually breached during a hurricane. And that was obviously, you know, an effect to the public and the fishermen at the time. One of them being actually my great-grandfather, excuse me, who was a fisherman who sailed right through it and talked about it. That will actually be something that will probably happen again. And what do we do from a coastal resiliency standpoint? So I blabbered on. I'll let everybody else talk. Thank you.
Okay, Trevor, or other members of your team, if you had questions that you wanted to ask of the people who've recently spoken.
Yeah, and I would just note that some members of our team are going to have to drop off, unfortunately. But I can hang around for a little bit longer to continue the conversation. I think the question about public access is very interesting to our team. I think in terms of that, you know, the idea of creating, you know, value beyond resilience or risk reduction. And so I think, you know, in particular, we can begin to map kind of the points of documented public access or sort of more formalized public access. But I think one question I had was whether there was any mapping that had been done of the sort of informal access points, let's call them, or sort of opportunities for new public access that have been explored through other kind of town planning processes that we may be able to leverage as part of our solution development.
Vince?
Thank you, Mary. I'm not aware of any map that has those kind of information on it that of the informal access points, but I will offer to collect them all up and work with everyone who's suggested them, and I can map them for use by Arcadis.
Okay, Holly, were you going to add something? I wasn't sure.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to mention that the planning director, Mr. Andrew Vorse, might be very beneficial in that regards with the One Beach program and how you know, that's kind of been a priority of the planning department of having this access for people.
Thank you, Holly. And Sarah had your hand up.
Yeah, just to reiterate what Holly was saying, I was going to also mention, someone else also mentioned the right-of-way committee. The Town Rights of Way Committee has a lot of that information. And then the land bank, which I know you have on your priority list of people or groups to talk to. One of their mission points is providing access. So land bank land also helps provide some of those access points.
And I'll add, there's tremendous local knowledge that's probably not captured anywhere, and we could probably give you, you know, half a dozen people. I'm thinking of Bob DaCosta, for instance, who is a fisherman who is, you know, been here for his whole life, and it was a former select board member. I mean, he probably has a tremendous amount of information that would be helpful if he's willing to share.
Yep.
Probably give you other names of people that you can talk to.
Yep. I mean, I think one of the activities we've explored have been contemplating is kind of a co-mapping exercise or sort of a map-based survey that would allow people to kind of document that local understanding in a way, you know, in a place-based way, so that we can, you know, ideally be incorporating that into our thinking, which is kind of beginning here today, actually. So.
We have a note from Ian Atherton.
Person.
Excuse me, Ian. We have a note from Deanne Atherton saying that she can assist with getting a listing of public way markers installed by the Roads and Rights of Way Committee. I think probably going directly to the committee will be sufficient, but Deanne's offering to assist if needed. Ian, I'm sorry to interrupt.
Oh,
go ahead.
not at all. You didn't at all, Madam Chair. And sorry, I don't have visual. Don't have my screen up and running. I just mentioned Pete Kaiser's name as another Islander who, along with Bobby DaCosta, would be a useful resource, I would have thought. Thank you.
Thank you, Ian. Other comments from committee members or from the public? Just a reminder to the public to send me a chat message, and we're happy to unmute you and have you contribute. If I don't see you, feel free to shout out if you are a committee member or other person who's able to unmute. Trevor, I'm not seeing anything, so back to you.
All right, well, great. So this was tremendously helpful. We'll circle up internally with our team and figure out whether we can either provide access to this link. Might be a little hard to navigate for some folks without a little bit of training. So we can also send a PDF version of what you're looking at here that committee members can provide comments on and send along any feedback that occurs after the meeting along to Vince, and he'll make sure it gets to us. So let me, I think, just to wrap up the conversation in terms of our next steps, I'll share back the presentation slides here. And yes, so hopefully you can see my screen, but next steps here are basically that, we're beginning or underway with phase 1 of the engagement process. I mentioned the hazard assessment approach. We have been working with Vince to make sure that we have a full understanding of all of the coastal flood and erosion data that already exists. And we are compiling that into an approach to establish both sort of design flood elevations for different types of infrastructure to inform a conversation about, risk tolerance over time and to help us understand risk and vulnerability across the island. So that will be forthcoming, and we'll look forward to sharing that with the committee. Mention the risk and vulnerability assessment, and then further out, I think we'll be thinking, already thinking about at a high level, but continuing to refine resilience and adaptation scenarios at multiple scales. And then we'll look forward to being back with this group in January. And work with Vince and Mary to make sure that we find a suitable date to be on your agenda. So thank you all for participating in this conversation and giving us your feedback. And I think I speak for our project team when I say we really look forward to working with you over the next 10 months or so.
Thank you, Trevor. We have another quick public comment from Elizabeth Trios. Thank you. It's been great to be able to participate in the work I've been engaged in these years, long distance. So, are there any other members of the public that wish to offer a comment at this point? We're looking at item 4 on our Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee, other public comment. Okay, seeing none. Other business discussion of the next meeting. So I did mention briefly that our next meeting is December 8th at 10 a.m. That's the current schedule. We will continue the discussion based on the presentation. Trevor, I'm assuming that you will be sending us the presentation and then any other materials you want us to have in support of that. Give the committee members an opportunity to review and reflect and continue the discussion. We'll also have the continued opportunity for public comment on December 8th. If there are items which the committee members want to add to the agenda, please let me or Vince know so we can work those in. Any questions from committee members about future agendas, future meetings in December, holiday schedule, anything like that? I will note that December has 5 Tuesdays. We did skip a meeting in October. So if we feel the need to have an additional meeting, there's a little bit of wiggle room. On the other hand, it's Christmas. So I'm definitely not going to try and squeeze something in. We don't need it. Peter, was that a comment or just a? Okay, if there are no other comments, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Thank you, Fritz. Do we have a second?
Second.
I heard Sarah as a second. So in alphabetical order, Gary Beller.
Yes.
Sarah Boyce.
Aye.
Peter Brace.
Aye.
Graham Dervich and Matt Fee had to drop off of the meeting. Ian Golding.
Aye.
Jen Carberg.
Aye.
Fritz McClure.
Aye.
And Chair says aye. Thank you so much for attending. I hope that we see you in December as well. And please do send comments to Vince Murphy, vmurphy@nantucket-ma.gov if you want to have a comment but are unable to attend. Goodbye, everybody.
Thank you, Mary. Happy Thanksgiving.
Happy Thanksgiving. Thanks, everybody.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Stay safe, wear a mask.
Thanks, Gary.
Thank you, everyone. I'm going to stop the recording now.